Hello everyone, Grim here. Thank you for making it to tonight's video. Please remember to like and subscribe. But in the meantime, sit back, relax, and enjoy. We killed Joseph Glass for the first time on August 18, 1999. I knew he was a strange case since day one. Never seen a guy so happy to die before. It was like we were doing him a favor. He refused the automatic appeal. He refused to be seen by a chaplain. He just wanted it over with. It had only taken a little over a year, and it was already time for him to make his appointment with God. He freaked me out. Just passing by his cell. He was like our very own Hannibal Lecter. The way he just stood there in the back of his cell like he'd been waiting for you. The lights always burned out in any cell he was in, and maintenance had gotten tired of fixing them. Not that he seemed to mind in the slightest. The darkness seemed to swallow his top half, and all I could see were the whites of his beady little eyes poking out of all that black. Billy drummed his baton against the bars. "Up and at him, cowpoke," he called in that mocking tone. "Time finally come for you to pay what you owe, you sick son of a—" "Billy," Warden Toff silenced him with a word. "If you can't act like a professional, you're gonna have to sit this one out." Billy paused and licked his chapped lips. "Aw," he muttered. "This is the show I can't miss." Glass seemed to tick Billy off more than any prisoner before him. He liked him to at least pretend to feel sorry for what they've done or act scared of what's coming to him. This one didn't even have the common decency to shed a tear. He was as stone-faced as a statue, even while being marched to the chair. Billy liked to joke sometimes that we ought to take the guy out back with some car batteries and really put the fear of God into him. Get him to cut out that stoic act. I think he was only half joking. After what this guy did to those girls, well, Billy has a daughter, so I guess it kind of struck a chord. We all watched him fry. The warden, his closest men, the thin-faced man representing the commissioner of corrections, the prison physician, the families of those poor girls. It couldn't have gone more by the book. Only oddity I didn't notice at the time was that the stench of death never quite left the clothes I'd worn that day. And then the next day, we came into work to see those white beady little eyes staring at us from the darkness again. "Good morning, sirs," he said, just as he did every morning in that airy, hoarse little voice. I'll admit it, I dropped everything I was carrying, stumbled back, stammered like a confused child. Hell, I almost screamed. You're not. You're supposed to be." "I don't know what you mean, sir." He leaned in like he was trying to stare a hole through my chest. His tone almost sounded disappointed. "You never came for me. You promised me that yesterday would be the end, sir. But you never came. I waited all night long. Why did you lie to me?" Me and Taff looked at each other. We both had the exact same question in our minds. If Glass was still alive, who the hell did we roll out into the morgue last night? Jesus Christ. Taff gagged when he pulled back the cavity cover, stumbling away. "It's Billy." I looked. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it. And I'll forever be haunted by the sight of my friend laying on his back, mouth agape and cloudy eyes staring into the ceiling. open wide as if he had spent his last moments in a state of terror. The public never found out what happened. The cover-up story was poor Billy had been taken by cardiac arrest. Internally, it was the scandal to end all scandals. Worst case of incompetence and negligence in history, they called it. They brought the hammer down on anyone even tangentially involved. Me and Taff were out in our ears, and they would have prosecuted us too, but that would have required admitting it even happened. But I could never wrap my head around it. Of dozens of witnesses, not a single person noticed that we were strapping a guard to the chair. Not an inmate. It was impossible to the point of absurdity. Glass had been the man in that chair. I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. Some months later, I noticed power flickering off all over the city one evening. It was brief, so I thought nothing of it, at least until I got a call from a familiar number the very next morning. I understand that you were one of the staff who regularly worked with one Joseph Glass. We would like to consult with you about an evolving situation. Oh. At 7 p.m. yesterday, we attempted the execution of Joseph Glass for the second time. There was a long pause, and when the voice returned, the professionalism had mountained away, replaced with baffled anxiety. And, well, it didn't work. I blinked. It didn't what? There came alongside. Perhaps it would be best if you saw for yourself. And just like that, me and Taff had our jobs back. Officially, Joseph Glass had been successfully executed on August 18th, 1999. Unfortunately, they tried again 6 months later, just to tie up loose ends. This time, he hadn't even had the courtesy of pretending to die. He just sat there on the chair, motionless and unaffected, while the CO who'd flipped the switch suddenly seized up and began to convulse, screaming and gnashing and wailing as electricity seared him beneath his skin, clawing at his chest until his eyes popped in his skull and rolled down his face like melted candle wax. All around him, lights flickered, machines bursting from pressure, electrical panels vomiting arcs of static. It was a mess. The feds were crawling all over this case now, from a department I've never heard of. Something about investigating preternatural activity. They told me Glass was refusing to speak to anyone but the COs who had once cared for him. Being walked into the interrogation room almost made me feel like I myself was a convict being marched to his execution. Glass was staring at me when I walked in like he'd been sat there motionless waiting for me. I expected nothing less. I took a shuddering breath as I sat across from him. I'd sat across from serial killers, psychos before, and showed no hint of fear. But now, I could not. Now, sitting across from a man who can kill people without touching them. Glass. Officer Mendez. His tone betrayed no emotion. Had thought you'd abandoned me. I winced. No, Glass. I'd just been temporarily relieved. It's good to see you again. Would you like a glass of water? I offered it to him. He didn't even look at it. His eyes just bored into mine, relentless. I'm here to ask you a few questions. Silence. Okay, Glass. I need to know how you killed Billy and Kramer." "I didn't," he replied. "It did. It? The thing standing behind you." I didn't bother to turn around. I had enough experience with prisoners trying to trick me into looking the other way while they pulled off some half-baked escape plan. "Glass, please, let's take this seriously," I replied. "I've always treated you with respect, haven't I? You've never had any problems with me." "Actually, I do. I have a problem with all of you." "Oh, you all here believe that death is a punishment." There was the first hint of emotion I'd ever heard in his voice. "It's not. It's freedom. The only freedom. You promised me that gift. You promised me you'd let me die. You've given it to so many other prisoners while leaving me behind with all of your machines and your science and your knowledge. Surely you can find a way, if anyone." I felt my throat suddenly dry. I had to take a sip of water myself and hoped it would quell my burning nerves. We're trying our best, Glass, but you have to work with us. It may help if you told us what exactly is preventing us from executing you." He moved for the first time, leaning in, so slowly as to be almost imperceptible. "It won't let me die." And that's when I felt a hand settle on my shoulder from behind. Everything stopped. My lungs stopped inflating. I swear my heart stopped beating and my blood froze in place in my veins. And it felt so cold. I could see the hand in the corner of my eyes, long and veiny and black. I could feel the breath on the back of my neck. I'd once mocked the way deers froze in headlights. Now I understood. I couldn't move, I couldn't blink, I couldn't think, I couldn't even take a single breath. Even as my lungs began to cry out for air and my vision blurred, and my thoughts melded together, all I could see was Joseph's eyes staring into mine. Those infinite fathoms of darkness, that staggering sea that swirled and stormed and thundered in the darkness of his irises, and the eyes of things waiting millions of leagues below the waters. And I would have suffocated there, too terrified to even breathe, if those agents in black had not called off the interrogation then and come storming into the room. Later they showed me the tape from the security cameras. There had been nothing behind me, nothing placing his thin hand upon my shoulder, nothing at all. On May 7th, 2001, Glass was sent to be executed for the third time by hanging, or so I'd heard, in some government black site somewhere far from prying eyes. While it was set to happen, me and Taft were sharing a glass of scotch in his office, nominally to celebrate, really because we were scared. Taft always struck me as young at heart despite his years, but this was the first time the warden had ever looked truly, properly old. He watched the yard below as he had a drink. "Did I ever tell you why I chose this line of work, Mendez?" I shook my head, and he sighed. "Back in '63, they found a woman's body in the back seat of a burnt-out car in some state park near my neighborhood. A prostitute. One of her Johns had chopped her up, burned all the evidence. And you know what got me, Mendez? Nobody cared. Nobody bothered to investigate. Who will notice? one less hooker on the corner of Fifth Avenue, right? It didn't sit right with me. The way I see it, Mendez, every life matters, even the ones we try to cast aside. Everybody's got people who love them, and childhood memories, and all that. Everybody deserves justice, no matter who they were. He set down his glass and looked me in the eyes. So I joined the force. Got the case reopened, found the guy, and I watched him fry. And I like to imagine she was there watching him too as he burned. There was a tense moment, and then a chuckle. 'Cause after that bullet in the hip in 71, I couldn't walk the beat anymore. But I've been just as happy here, watching the justice being served. It makes me feel like there's some kind of karmic order in the world. Good deeds and bad deeds get repaid in kind. It was clear there was something lurking beneath his words, some unspoken thesis. Eventually, with old wrinkled tired eyes, he said it. I thought about it. And if Glass doesn't die tonight, I'm finally gonna retire, Mendez. He confessed. After what he did to those girls, what kind of order can there be in the world where a monster like that just is beyond justice? I was shocked. Warden Taft always struck me as an unmoving fixture. What would we do without him? He'll die, sir. I promised. It'll work this time. It has to. But he seemed deeply uncertain. With one last shuddering drink, he leaned forward. His eyes. He stared at my expression, as if desperate for me to understand, for me to know. Those things in his eyes. Haven't you seen them? And at that moment, Taft was yanked up out of his chair. It was so sudden, so inexplicable. I could barely register what I was witnessing. Some unseen force lifted him 2 or 3 feet above the ground, dangling him there. He choked, coughed, and sputtered, desperate to gasp down air which would not come, and clawed at something around his neck which I could not see. He was hanging. I realized, and with wide, horrified eyes, the same time Billy's had been. He silently begged me for help. I sprang from my chair and wrapped my arms around his dangling legs. At first I tried to pull him down to the floor, but I realized I was only tightening the invisible noose around his neck. Then I tried lifting him as high as I could, which gave him some relief, but not much. Tears rolled down his face as it swelled and turned blue, and even though I could not see the noose, I could see the bruised purple skin where it had squeezed around his neck. All while I screamed myself hoarse. Help! Somebody, please! Jesus Christ, we need help in here! Nobody came. And all of a sudden, some unseen force came to sweep my feet out from under me. I dropped like a bag of bricks. But I was too startled. I maintained my grip around the warden's legs. I fell and yanked him down with me. His body suddenly jolted with a sickening crack. It took me a while to manage the courage to look up at him. His neck had been stretched far too long, and his head was bent to the side almost at a 90-degree angle. Eyes wide, round, and bloated, tongue hanging from dry lips. And whatever force had suspended him disappeared, and his body fell upon me while I screamed and screamed. I came bursting from his office to find my co-workers casually chatting and working just outside. Somehow, despite all my screaming and begging while Taff was dying, none of them had heard a thing. I took a page from Taff. I wanted out. We were dealing with something unholy here, something whose tendrils could reach any distance, and my life, who knows, maybe even my soul, was at hazard. But the agents in sharp suits made one thing clear. If I refused to cooperate, well, I would make the perfect scapegoat for the murder of Warden Taft. I was marched into the interrogation room to find that Joseph Glass had abandoned all pretense of humanity. His eyes had darkened to a pure black, or perhaps he had no eyes at all, only windows into some place of utter darkness. I was shaking like a leaf as I sat in front of him, feeling more like a prisoner than he was. Mr. Glass. No reply. I shuddered, trying to focus on my little piece of paper to distract myself from the blackness of his eyes. I have some questions I'm supposed to ask you. Is that okay? Silence. I take a deep breath. How old are you, Glass? I thought it was just one of those basic questions. Conversation starters, really. I couldn't have prepared myself for his answer. I'm old, child. His voice was nothing like I remembered. It was deep and low and rumbling, like there were multiple people speaking in unison, and were all equally ancient. Older than you could possibly know. Older than this nation. And older even than the empire that once bore it. I had to fight the basic animal instinct to flee. Focus on the questions, I thought. Why did you do what you did to those girls? Just so I could feel something again, he whispered. Anything. Did you not feel the slightest bit of guilt, remorse? You ask that of me? Me, who has watched empires rise and fall? He almost sounded amused. Does time feel remorse? For time has killed far more than I. But mankind is like a hydra. All I've killed will be replaced by essentially identical stock. And far greater numbers. And then they will die and be replaced. And so the cycle will continue forever. Did you expect me to pity them for being given the death I myself covet? Only the dead are given leave of this cycle. It is a blessing. And suddenly he stood from his chair as if he had never been restrained at all. A blessing you promised me, Officer Mendez. I stared up at him in disbelief. What? How did you... But I couldn't even stammer a sentence out before he was upon me, crawling across the table with the eerie grace of a spider. These were no longer the imperceptible hints of emotion I'd come to expect. It was like a switch had been flipped. Tears streamed down his cheeks, snarling with genuine rage, hurt and betrayal, And beneath those black seas in his eyes, all the things that haunted the fathoms below were rising to the surface.
You owe me death. Make good on your word. Pay your debt.
I cried out and recoiled from his every touch with disgust. But he was stronger than he looked. I couldn't worm a way out of his impossible grip.
I won't. Get off of me, you sick bastard. Do it. Pay me what you owe.
It was like 1,000 different voices screaming in my ear. Straining and weeping, I locked my hands round his neck and pressed my thumbs against his throat, trying to strangle him. But instead, I could feel that grip upon my own neck, squeezing the life out of myself as his lungs burned for air, yet I kept pressing harder and harder as if hoping it might somehow break through whatever unholy force was protecting him. And those terrible hands grasped at my shoulders again, and I was paralyzed by a terror that could be called nothing but ancient and primal. Like the thing standing behind me was the same force that had kept my ancestors huddled, terrified in their caves 100,000 years ago. And every one of those voices was crying out to me through my very blood. And it pulled me from my chair, threw me as though I were weightless, and the next thing I knew I was waking up in the infirmary. Once more, none of this was captured on the security camera. In the footage, I just enter the room, have a seat with strange, almost robotic movements, and then the both of us just sit there staring at each other without speaking, without moving, without blinking for an hour. After this, Joseph Glass entered a catatonic state and from then on refused to converse with even me. Now that my usefulness has ended, the agents discarded me like yesterday's trash. Didn't even seem to care if I tell anybody. Who would believe me? I thought I had gotten lucky, that my nightmares were over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Go sorting through any public record and you won't find a single mention of the name Joseph Glass. They've squirreled him away in that off-the-books black site and scrubbed away every other trace of him. I'd say he'd been underpersoned, if indeed he could ever be called a person at all. But they're still trying every execution method in the book. I don't know quite why. Maybe it's for research. I'm sure the U.S. military would love to find the secret to making its men unkillable as glass. And besides, they're not the ones who have to deal with the consequences. On June 3rd, 2005, they tried a firing squad. I know this because me and my wife were out on our second honeymoon, slow dancing by the lake at night to our favorite song when I felt a wetness against my chest. I looked down to see her eyes as gray and dull as foggy glass and her chest shredded to Swiss cheese by rounds that made no sound. On December 23rd, 2012, they tried lethal injection. That was the day that they found my son's car wrapped around a tree, and baffled coroners discovered that he was dead before the accident even occurred. His bloodstream was polluted with pavlune and potassium chloride. It's been years since I've isolated myself from everybody I knew, hermiting away in this cabin in the middle of nowhere, and yet the stench of death still follows me. Just a couple years ago, I found a news report mentioning my nephew. Apparently, he'd been found completely exsanguinated, his veins emptied, utterly, despite no signs of a struggle. God only knows what kind of arcane methods of execution they're trying by now. He's not gonna let me walk away from this. Not while I still owe him a debt. But I've been doing some research too. Researched into every untold legend of things I witnessed, starting up from the blackened sea and glass's eyes. I've learned things men were not meant to know. Practice rites, assembled tools, ingredients, and I think I know where they're keeping him. Even though they blindfolded me, I counted the seconds between every turn. On our way to the black side, and I've since spent weeks watching the place, cataloging every point of entry. Maybe I'm slipping into madness. Or maybe I've truly found the way to put an end to this horror. To finally give this monster the justice that Taft would have wanted for him. Joseph Glass had been right about one single thing. I have to pay what I owe, even if it kills me. Hello everyone, Grim here. Thank you very much for making it to the end of this story. I hope you enjoyed tonight's video. Today's story was titled, There's a Death Row Inmate Who We Have Executed Over a Dozen Times. He Won't Stay Dead. Written by the amazingly talented author, No Mass 39. I'm going to have a couple more stories from this author coming onto the channel soon. I've been graciously given the permission to read or narrate his stories, so hopefully we will have some fun there. And for those who are waiting for or hoping to hear about Something Beneath Us, that will be coming out this week. Now, I do have to have a little bit of a touch on some things, and I'll probably add something like this to the start of the next video for those who don't hear this, but I will be reducing the amount of videos I release to 3 to 4 a week, just while the rest of the world is kind of coming into summertime, as the channel is not getting much movement at the moment, and I think that's because people are engaged elsewhere. So please enjoy what I put out in the meantime, and once the numbers start to jump up again, I will go back to my regular upload. Hopefully get about 1 to 5 videos out. Well, anyway, I've been Grim, you've been amazing, and be safe wherever you are. Have an amazing night or day, and as always, I'm, well, signing off.